The swoon hypothesis is any of a number of ideas that aim to explain the resurrection of Jesus, proposing that Jesus did not die on the cross, but merely fell unconscious, and was later revived in the tomb in the same mortal body. This 200-year-old hypothesis is still the subject of debate to this day. 18th and 19th centuries. Early proponents of this theory include German Carl Friedrich Barth, who suggested in around 1780 that Jesus deliberately feigned his death, using drugs provided by the physician Luke to appear as a spiritual messiah and get Israel to abandon the idea of a political messiah. In this interpretation of the events described in the Gospels, Jesus was resuscitated by Joseph of Arimathea, with whom he shared a connection through a secret order of the Essenes, a group that appear in many of the swoon theories. Around 1800, Carl Venturini proposed that a group of supporters dressed in white, who were, with Jesus, members of a secret society, had not expected him to survive the crucifixion, but heard groaning from inside the tomb, where Jesus had regained consciousness in the cool, damp air. They then frightened away the guards and rescued him. A third rationalist theologian, Heinrich Paulus, wrote in works from 1802 onwards that he believed that Jesus had fallen into a temporary coma and somehow revived without help in the tomb. He was critical of the vision hypothesis and argued that the disciples must have believed that God had resurrected Jesus. Friedrich Schleiermacher endorsed a form of Paulus's theory in the early 1830s. Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim movement, proposed a theory in his 1899 book Jesus in India that Jesus traveled to India after surviving the crucifixion. 20th century. Michael Bygent, Richard Lee and Henry Lincoln, in the 1982 book Holy Blood, Holy Grail, speculated that Pontius Pilate was bribed to allow Jesus to be taken down from the cross before he was dead. In 1992, Barbara Tiering explored the theory in depth in her book Jesus and the Riddle of the Dead Sea Scrolls. In 2006, Bygent published their Jesus Papers, her book that describes how Jesus may have survived the crucifixion. Other 20th century proponents of various swoon theories include Ernest Brimdocker, Robert Graves and Joshua Pedro, Hugh J. Schonfield, Donovan Joyce, J.D.M. Derrett, Holger Kirsten, Andrew Gale, David Mish. George Moore uses this theory in his novel Rook Kerith. Islamic Perspective. Perhaps the biggest proponent of the swoon hypothesis over the past 20 years has been Muslim preacher Ahmed Deedat of South Africa, whose book, Crucifixion, a Crucifixion, has been widely printed and distributed all over the Muslim world. He takes a critical look at the events in the four Gospels and theorizes a scenario of events similar to the swoon hypothesis. The Islamic position on the subject of crucifixion, which is a form of docetism, is highlighted in verse of the Quran, and for their unbelief, and their uttering against Mary a mighty calumny, and for the saying, we slew the Messiah, Jesus son of Mary, the messenger of God, yet they did not slay him, neither crucified him, only a likeness of that was shown to them. Madea Perspective. According to the late 19th century writings of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement, the theological basis of the Ahmadi belief is that Jesus was only in a swoon when he was taken down from the cross. Ahmad argued that when Jesus was taken down from the cross, he had lapsed into a state similar to Jonah's state of swoon in the belly of a fish. Mirza Ghulam Ahmad interpreted the phrase in Deuteronomy chapter 21 verse 23, Kiki Lelat Elohim Talwi, for a hanged man is the curse of God, as suggesting that God would never allow one of his true prophets to be brutally killed in such a degrading manner as crucifixion. Following his ordeal, Jesus was cured of his wounds with a special ointment of Jesus's Supporting arguments. It was uncommon for a crucified healthy adult to die in the time described by the Gospels. The Gospel of Mark reports that Jesus was crucified at 9 in the morning and died at 3 in the afternoon, or 6 hours after the crucifixion. Pilate was surprised to hear that Jesus had died so soon. The average time of suffering before death by crucifixion is stated to be about 2 to 4 days, and there were reported cases where the victims lived for as long as 9 days. Of course, the time of death by crucifixion depended on the type of crucifixion, and no accounts have been found of the exact method of Jesus's crucifixion. Further support is lent to the theory when Jesus's body in the Gospel narratives is quickly whisked away and hidden from public view. No elaborate funeral arrangements and no public viewing of the corpse are known to take place. The body is taken down from the cross and immediately handed over to a close disciple who transports Jesus's body to a nearby, secure burial chamber. A major problem with this interpretation is that Jewish religious law generally forbids embalming, and therefore Jews generally bury their dead as soon as possible. Jewish burials take place as quickly as possible, following a principle of honoring the dead. One reason to doubt this hypothesis is that the Gospel of John states that a soldier thrust a spear in Jesus's side before he was taken off the cross. However, the Gospel of John is the latest of the 4 canonical Gospels. None of the remaining 3 contain this story. Counter-arguments. Jesus' state of health. The swoon hypothesis has been criticized by many, including medical experts who, based on the account given in the New Testament, conclude that Jesus was definitively dead when removed from the cross. Many others consider it unlikely that Jesus would be capable of inspiring faith in those who saw him after barely surviving a crucifixion, including the 19th-century rationalist theologian David Strauss, who wrote, "It is impossible that a being who had stolen half-dead out of the sepulchre, who crept about weak and ill and wanting medical treatment, could have given the disciples the impression that he was a conqueror over death and the grave, the Prince of Life, an impression that lay at the bottom of the future ministry." Medical arguments. Using the work of Samuel Horton, commentators Frederick Charles Cook and Josh McDowell argued that the death of Jesus in the Gospels could not have been fabricated, as the text displays medical knowledge not available at the time. Horton wrote that the description in the Gospel of John of the flowing of blood and water after the soldier pierced Jesus' side with a spear was prescient. With the foregoing cases, most anatomists who have devoted their attention to this subject are familiar, but the 2 following cases, although readily explicable on physiological principles, are not recorded in the books. Nor have I been fortunate enough to meet with them. Medical authorities W. D. Edwards, W. J. Gable and F. E. Hosmer offered the following analysis in regard to the New Testament Greek and the medical data. Jesus of Nazareth underwent Jewish and Roman trials, was flogged, and was sentenced to death by crucifixion. The scourging produced deep stripe-like lacerations and appreciable blood loss, and it probably set the stage for hypovolemic shock, as evidenced by the fact that Jesus was too weakened to carry the crossbar to Golgotha. At the site of crucifixion, his wrists were nailed to the patibulum, and, after the patibulum was lifted onto the upright post, his feet were nailed to the stipes. The major pathophysiologic effect of crucifixion was an interference with normal respirations. Accordingly, death resulted primarily from hypovolemic shock and exhaustion asphyxia. Jesus' death was ensured by the thrust of a soldier's spear into his side. Modern medical interpretation of the historical evidence indicates that Jesus was dead when taken down from the cross. William Lane Craig argues in his book book using the Jewish historian Josephus in saying the Jewish historian Josephus tells of how he had 3 acquaintances who had been crucified removed from the crosses, but despite the best medical attention 2 of 3 died anyway. The extent of Jesus's tortures was such that he could never have survived the crucifixion and entombment. The suggestion that a man so critically wounded then went on to appear to the disciples on various occasions in Jerusalem and Galilee is pure fantasy.